I extend on behalf of the Center for Economic and Social Studies and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome to all the dignitaries who are here today to this 7th Foundation Day lecture of our center. I extend a warm welcome to the speaker today, Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who is a research fellow at ISA Institute for Labor Economics, Bonn, and Center for Development Studies, University of Bath, and more importantly, his district professor at CESS, Center for Economic and Social Studies. So he is with us from last September, and he'll be with us for the next 2 years. I welcome Professor J. Mahender Reddy, founder member, Center for Economic and Social Studies, and also his distinguished advisor, ICFAI Society, who will be presiding the lecture here. I welcome all the online participants. We have extended the online invitation to different universities, and I see that they have joined online. Extend a warm welcome to our board members, Dr. G.R. Reddy and Professor Fatima Ali Khan, and daughter of our founder director, Dr. Wahiduddin Khan, Asmat Wahiduddin Khan, and invitees who have come from other universities, and students, scholars, faculty of our center. I think it would be appropriate to know about our center, the Foundation Day, the context of today's lecture. And because the center was formally established on 26th February 1980, and Sri B.P.R. Vithal, who was the founder of the institute, then planning and finance secretary, he felt the need for a research institute to serve as a think tank to the state government. The center was registered under the Registration of Societies Act with the founder members, Dr. Sri Vithal, Professor G. Ram Reddy, Dr. S.K. Rao, and Professor Hanuman Rao, and Professor Wahiduddin Khan. The center was set up as an autonomous institution working for the state government. It was thought it's working as in the lines of planning commission, serving as a platform between academicians and policymakers. The objective was to strengthen the planning machinery at that time by undertaking studies on the state economy from a longer perspective, and also certain specific problems at a more immediate nature. The vision of the center has been to become one of the top centers of excellence in research in development studies. We have a PhD program in development studies. By working on economic and social problems of the poor, reorienting and diversifying its research into new fields and meeting the challenges posed by changes in the development paradigms. The center is situated in a 5-acre land, which was given by the Osmania University with its 2 telescope buildings it's called the Observatory Campus, and in 1981. The foundation stone was laid by Sri T. Anjaya, the then Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, on 20th February. Sri Vithal Garu insisted later that the foundation stone for the building of the CESS should be put up prominently at the entrance, which was completed during a special occasion in 2016 on 28th January. So as we enter, we find the foundation stone which was laid at the time of the beginning of this center. Subsequently, the center came under the network of ICFAI institutions in 1986. Appreciating its role in the promotion of research and training, the ICFAI recognized it as a national institute. Since then, the center has been receiving maintenance grants from the state government and the ICFAI, and project-specific grants from state, central, and international organizations and other institutions. The center has been fortunate to have eminent social scientists as its chairman, directors, apart from experienced government and ICFAI nominees, contributed widely and deeply to its development. Apart from Sri B.P.R. Vithal, Sri S.R. Ramurthy, Professor M. Khusro, Professor G. Ram Reddy, Professor C.H. Hanuman Rao, Professor K. L. Krishna, Professor Wahiduddin Khan, Professor Krishnaji, Professor Venkat Ramaya, Professor Mahender Reddy, Professor Manoj Panda, and Galak. Professor Galak served as either as chairman or as directors respectively. The research areas of the center have been rural development, poverty, agriculture, food security, environment and natural resource management, demography, and health. Over years, the center's research has also diversified into other sectors of the economy, industrial development, services sector, international trade and social sectors of education, water, sanitation, decentralized governance, panchayat raj institutions, state and local finances, human development, and further child studies, gender studies, tribal studies, and studies related to socially and economically vulnerable groups that have gained attention. Recently, a research unit has been started to work on inclusive development at the center. The center has a regular PhD program started in 2016, currently with around 50 scholars on roles working on various themes. The organizing of the Foundation Day lectures has begun from 2013 onwards, and the first lecture was given by V.M. Rao in 2013. Later, C. Rangarajan has given in 2014, S.R. Hashim in 16, Deepak Nair, Ramesh Chand, and last, that is the sixth Foundation Day lecture was given by Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. I take the opportunity to invite once again and thank Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who is a visiting professor at the CESS, who has accepted to give this lecture. And we know that he's a very well-known, well-acclaimed human development economist, researches in the areas of health, education, nutrition, sanitation, and also skill development. I request I once again thank Professor Mehrotra for being with us today, and I request him to give the lecture. Thank you.
Santosh Mehrotra, Madam Director Revathi, Professor Fatima Ali Khan, Dr. G.R. Reddy, other distinguished members of the founder members of CESS, Azma Ali Khan, and the founder of this and distinguished members who are online. You see, I welcome all of you to this lecture. And the founder, when the institute was started, the first director was my very good friend, whose picture you see on to my right side, the first picture, Professor Dr. Wahiduddin Khan. And I'm happy his daughter is here. Most cordial welcome to you, madam. He was a finest gentleman, apart from a scholarship. You see, we were together in the Administrative Staff College of India. Then he moved to this as the director. At the outset, I extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor Revathi for giving me this opportunity, and Professor Santosh Mehrotra, Research Fellow at the ISA Institute in Bonn, and a visiting professor at CESS, and also at the University of Bath in UK, on the topic, as you know, can India universalize social insurance before its demographic dividend ends? This is a very, very important topic, not just to the audience sitting here, but to the entire country, including the Prime Minister of India. It's a privilege for me to be here and to be in this hall. The hall on which it is named, B.P.R. Vithal, was my very good friend. I worked with him, and we had many, many interactions with him. He was one of the finest gentlemen I have come across, and it's a privilege to be here this morning. As we all know, India's greatest challenge is the informal sector. It comes to about 91% of the total, which is one of the probably highest. Agriculture, you all know agriculture, construction, small and medium enterprises, workers in garments, handicrafts, food processing, beading, rolling, daily wage laborers, masons, plumbers, carpenters, domestic, in our houses we have domestic helpers, street vendors, kirana store workers, hawkers, auto rickshaw drivers, gig economy and platform workers, small scale mining, quarrying, brick kiln, embroidery, incense stick making, rag pickingers. These sectors highlight the wide prevalence of informal employment, where workers often lack legal protection, no social security, and no stable income, no guarantee of the job tomorrow. Even for those with stable earnings, managing household expense, children's education, and elders, as we all know, is a challenge. Without financial security or assured income, the difficulties are even greater. According to the Indian Constitution, Article 47, and this is there, Professor Malhotra's beautiful lecture, which is probably available on the website, that it is there in the Constitution to provide for, it's a responsibility of the government for social security to old age, disabled, as well as unemployed. So government has to give high priority, and I think much will be mentioned by Professor Mehrotra in this meeting. Today, we look forward to his insights on critical questions such as when can India realistically achieve universal social insurance? When can we get what? How should the responsibility be shared between the central and state governments? What are the financial implications of implementing the universal social insurance? Should the rollout be phased? What are the, I think I'm sure you will get to know what should be the priorities. What progress has been made so far, and what are the key roadblocks now? You see, India's demographic dividend. You see, we all say so many times, you have seen the Prime Minister, Cabinet saying, we have demographic dividend, we have demographic, but you should know when it is going to end. Professor Mehrotra has done excellent research work and come out with the conclusion that is 2040. 2040 is not too far. We are already 25, and we talk about 2030, 20, another 10 years go over. Demographic dividend is over. So if we do not act now, we will face new challenges of increased demand for pension and healthcare and the consequent financial implications. At present, the biggest schemes benefiting informal sectors are Ayushman Bharat. Prime Minister has said so many times. That is one thing which is helping, you see. And then Atal Pension Yojana, APY. You see, it is contributory. You have to make some contribution. Government will give something, employer will give something. So these are the things, but coverage may not be to the extent we would like to see. A key step in expanding social security for informal workers. That is the key word for this seminar. How do we give social security for the informal workers? It is India's Social Security Code 2020, which aims to extend benefits to the informal sector. However, implementation remains a significant challenge. I am sure the speaker will expand on it as mentioned in the abstract, and I thank the director for including the abstract as a part of the lecture, and that should be the practice in all CESS lectures, whether it is Foundation Day Lecture or any other lectures. That would give an idea to the audience. What is it that I am going to expect in this lecture? It would also be insightful to discuss very briefly what the experience of the other countries is. You see, China, developing countries. You can't compare with the developed countries. China, Mexico, Thailand, somewhat similar like this, any other, and how they have tackled. So he is going to spell out the design and architecture for extending coverage of the social insurance for the informal workers, including with some numbers. Let us wait and see what the numbers are and what the methodology. Once again, I most cordially welcome Professor Santosh Mehrotra, and thank you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Revathi and Professor Mahender Reddy for inviting me. And I'm very much looking forward to being back here. I'm very pleased to be a visiting professor at your institute, and I'm delighted that many of you are joining us online. I'm particularly pleased to be delivering the Foundation Day Lecture, and I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to interact with you. I plan to speak for about 45 minutes. You can see that 91% of our workforce is informal. Informal is defined by the ILO as all workers who don't have any access to old age pension, death and disability insurance, and maternity benefit. Those are the core dimensions as defined by the ILO Convention of 1952, which defined the characteristics of social insurance. Now, I'm going to sort of spell out for your benefit the roadmap, as Professor Reddy rightly pointed out. The roadmap, but before the roadmap, I'll speak about the principles and the architecture. So let me start straight away. This is the structure of my presentation. I'll begin by talking about what I regard as a crisis of employment that the country faces. I'll spell out the dimensions of that shortly. And this crisis of employment is actually very directly connected to a structural crisis in the economy, which I will spell out briefly. What we have seen in the last 10 odd years is that there had been till about 10 years ago a slight decline in the share of informal workers from 93% to 91% of the total workforce, but that process has been reversed. So the decline was minor, but that minor decline itself has now been reversed. So I'm going to begin by talking about why Social Security is essential for informal workers at the current conjuncture. I will then go on to talk about 7 principles that can ensure Social Security for all workers in India. None of those 7 principles are actually currently in place. Then go on to talk about the Social Security Code of 2020 and ask the question whether that code, which has been passed by Parliament but not implemented because it's not been notified, we can answer questions about why it's not been notified later. Whether it addresses those principles, and my answer to that question is no, it does not. What should be the architecture of the Social Security system that universalizes Social Security by 2030? I'll talk about that architecture, how much it would cost. I would also discuss that. Now, before I proceed along that structure, let me just spell out the following. It's very important for us all to understand that Social Security, the term Social Security as it's used in the international development economics literature and by the ILO, consists essentially of 2 components. One is social assistance, which all of us are rather familiar with, and I will spell that out in a minute. And the other is social insurance. The 2 together should constitute the term Social Security. So I'm going to be speaking only about social insurance. My objective is not to speak about social assistance because there is already a lot of social assistance around in our country and in the state in which you live. So social assistance essentially tends to be given to people on the principle of, it should be available to most citizens. Of course, you can have a system of targeting as you have for PM Kisan, as you have for Raitu Bandhu, as you have for many other schemes that have been started in the recent years. You don't have to be a worker in order to access these. PDS is a national system, Manrega is a national social assistance system, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is yet another social assistance system. And many of the cash transfers that I think many of you are familiar with are also included in that category. I'm not talking about that. Let's be very clear, that's not what the objective of my paper is and the objective of today's talk. I'm focusing on social insurance only, which is meant for workers. And as I've already begun by saying that there are three constituent elements. One is old age pension, the other is death and disability insurance in the case of an accident at work, and the final one is maternity benefit. I will come to health, which was mentioned by Professor Reddy a few moments ago, a little later, why I'm not discussing health coverage. But these are absolutely central. And when I say 91% of the workforce doesn't have social insurance, these are the 3 that I'm talking about. Now, as I said earlier, social assistance in our country is widespread, but only 9% of the workforce has social insurance because 91% of our workforce is informal. And that puts us in the category of Africa. You know, not a day passes without national media and the government reminding you that we are the 5th largest economy in the world, we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. What they don't tell you, of course, is that in the rank of countries by level of per capita income, we are probably in the 140s, not the 5th. Okay? Just keep remembering that all the time. 91% of our workforce is informal. Practically everyone in this room is either aspiring to work in the formal workforce or is already in the formal workforce. So we are talking about the vast majority of our population. This is a share which you find 91% informal, is a share you find in Africa. You don't find it anywhere else in the world. So let's not pretend that we are some great superpower, because we are not, by this definition. We are nowhere close to being a Vikasita Bharat, a subject that I will come back to. Okay? Now, why do we need social insurance is what is spelled out here. The first reason, I believe, is that despite a fall in poverty by the Tendulkar poverty line between 2004 and 2012, from 406 million to 268 million, latest consumption expenditure survey has been used to estimate, using a higher than Tendulkar poverty line, the Rangarajan poverty line. Professor Rangarajan was apparently one of the persons who delivered one of the first Foundation Day lectures here. So the Rangarajan poverty line, when it's applied to the 2022-23 consumption expenditure survey, says, unlike what Surjit Bhalla will tell you, the government economist, that it's 22% of the workforce is poor. Remember this number, because we are going to come back to this. This is one reason, because the vast majority of informal workers are poor. 93% of our workforce is informal, while all informal workers are not poor, all poor are likely to be informal. Let's just be very clear about that. A third reason why I argue in the paper we need social insurance is that 30% of GDP and 40% of exports around are contributed by the unorganized sector. And the vast majority of the informal sector, of the informal workforce, works in the unorganized sector, a concept I'll come back to later, because we need to make a distinction between those who are, the enterprises in the unorganized sector versus the workers, because you can have workers who are informal in the unorganized sector, but you can have informal workers in the organized sector as well, a subject that I will come back to. So the point is, if they're producing 30% of GDP and 40% of exports, so they're creating economic value. Many of these firms, unorganized sector firms, which are often unregistered, pay GST. So the majority of unorganized sector units may be unregistered, a subject that I will dwell on if you're interested. A fourth reason which I argue is that the historical evidence from rich countries tells us that social insurance for workers, meaning having pensions, having some form of social security for old age, having pensions has a downward effect on total fertility rate. This is demonstrated by work done by Chinio and Revathi and by Chinio et al. And fertility rates, we all know, are kept high by the need of children as an insurance against old age. I'm sure you heard this argument before. We don't need it because we are all insured. We are all certain that we are going to have a pension, not 90% of our workforce. In addition, there's a dimension. Son preference is found not just in India, but also in China. And son preference was one reason that was driving up the population growth in China. And that had led to the then government in 1980 to impose a one-child policy in 1980. So clearly, social insurance, if provided for the vast majority of the poor, has a downward effect on fertility. Important dimension that a subject we can discuss after explanation. And finally, there is this belief in our country, especially among the middle class, even among the intelligentsia, that we are a very young country. Are we? Let me give you some information, some data about this. India entered into its demographic dividend in the early 1980s. We've already been in that phase of any economy where the share of the working age population is rising and the share of the dependent population, i.e. under 15s and over 60-year-olds, is falling. We have already been in that phase since the early 1980s. That phase is about to end in 15 years, as I will show. Half of those in the working age and those who are in the workforce are already at age 45 or over. Half. That means in 15 years' time, if they are already 45 now, they'll be 60 or retirement age then. In half. So we are well on our way to becoming an aging society. We are not a young country, and we have to begin to prepare for this. Now it's already very late. Moving on very quickly. Now look at this graphic. It's a graphic that has been prepared by my good friend, Professor Jajati Parida, sitting here in the front row, the professor of economics at the University of Hyderabad, with whom I'm working on a new book called India Out of Work, to be published soon by Bloomsbury, London. Anyway, let's come back to this graphic. Look at the central bar. The top bar is actually about 15 to 29-year-olds. This graph runs from 2011 to 2071. And the bottom one is the total is the top. You're not interested in that. Let's look at those in the working age from 15 to 59. Right? That's the central line, the blue line. This is what I meant when I said that our demographic dividend ends in 15 years flat. When this information was shared by me with the current labor minister, he didn't believe it. So many of you may possibly not believe it. So I want you to see this and look at this very carefully, because please notice that after this increase in the working age, and this is the size of those in the working age, doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to be working, because they will be working if they are looking for work and also find work. A subject I'll come back to. But number starts decreasing thereafter. In other words, our dividend is ending. We are an aging society. We are going to become a very rapidly aging society, and aged people need pensions. And we are not providing for it. We are not even preparing for it. That's a foundational argument of my paper, and let me move on quickly in the interest of time. Half of our working age population is over 45. But there are young who are entering the labor force at the rate of 6 to 7 million per annum. And what is the employment situation? I want to use a few slides to give you a sense of what the employment crisis is. This is showing youth unemployment rates. Youth are defined as 15 to 29-year-olds. Youth unemployment rates for between 1993 to 22-23. These are hard numbers by level of education: illiterate primaries, middle, secondary, higher secondary, graduate, formal vocational training, technical training. So these are the unemployment rates for different points of time. Look at what happens to open unemployment rates in the year 17-18. Look at the sharp rise here. If this doesn't spell a crisis, I don't know what spells a crisis. This is 36% of our graduates were unemployed. That number has fallen slightly, but it's not fallen significantly by 2023. I can expose the reality of this 2023 number or so-called decline later on if you're interested, not now. Even those with formal vocational training have high unemployment rates, and those with degrees, the engineering degrees, the private colleges opening all over your state and all the southern part of the country, and in fact the rest of the country as well, They are generating what? 37% unemployment rates. That's what they're generating. So we are expanding the higher education system, but we are creating unemployables and we are creating unemployed. That's the increase over a 10-year period alone. So this is the employment crisis that I was referring to, which is related to an economic crisis, which I won't have time to speak about, because where is though I'll refer to it briefly. And that's one dimension of the economic crisis that I was talking about. All the talk is about make in India, that India should become a manufacturing nation, which it isn't. China is the one which has seen economic growth being driven by manufacturing. In our country, growth has been driven by services, but we want to become a manufacturing country, correct? That's what all the talk about Make in India is. When I was in the Planning Commission in 2012, when we were finalizing the 12th five-year plan, the last plan of this country, we had written down into the 12th five-year plan in industrial policy. That fell by the wayside, and all you got was a slogan called Make in India. Now look at what the outcome has been under Make in India. This is 13-14. For 25 years, up until 2013-14, the contribution of manufacturing to GDP used to be 17%. Since then, it has fallen. And fallen dramatically, as you can see. It falls sharply down and is only just beginning to climb up. This is 22 data. The 23-24 data is also available. It doesn't show much improvement. It's still at 15.9. In other words, we are way below the 25-year average of 17% or so contribution to GDP. At the same time, manufacturing employment, total manufacturing employment in 2012, about 10 years ago, which used to be 60 million, actually fell. It fell to a trough of about 55 million. It has climbed back up slowly in the post-COVID recovery. But that's what your Make in India is. The talk is about Make in India, but you are seeing manufacturing contribution to GVA falling, and declines began after 2012. So what structural change that was taking place between 2004 and 14, when we were generating 7.5 million new non-farm jobs each year, and a process of structural change was in process because manufacturing was growing, that has been reversed. Okay? Next. It's not just that manufacturing is reversed. You see, between 2004 and 18-19, the total number of workers in agriculture had been dropping. That's one dimension of structural change, where the number of workers in agriculture must drop and the share of industry and services increases. It was dropping. This is the number till 2018-19. It's about 200 million. From about 270 million in 2004, it drops to about 200 million, and then it starts to rise. When COVID sets in, not just 35 million workers go back in 2020, more go back in 21, yet more go back in 22, yet more go back in 23. So in 2024, the absolute number of workers in agriculture is a good 80 million higher, or 40% higher than the 200 million that we started with in agriculture in 2019. That's called a reversal of structural change. That's what I call a structural economic crisis. That's why you see the unemployment rates that I was showing you earlier. Okay, that's the crisis that we are in. Moving on. Let me turn to the second part of my lecture, which is, what are the principles that should be applied to social insurance? This is the employment scenario. This is on top of this 91% of those who are in the workforce who are informal. Okay, that we've already established. So what are the principles that we need? Let me move on quickly in the interest of time. First, like all rich countries of the world, if we want to become Vikasita Bharat, we have to ensure that all our workers have social security. Because all workers in a Vikasita country have social security. They all have access to health. They all have access to education. We'll come back to health in a minute. But we are still living in a country with probably a literacy rate of 85%. Best case scenario, we don't know for certain because we don't have a census. But health will come back. Point is, we need a universal social security system or social insurance system, which would be consistent with the ILO Convention 102 of 1952, which is what I began by talking about, and ILO recommendation about social insurance of 2012. What does that imply? I'm just going to make a very brief reference to the EPFO. We all know about the 9% of our workforce, which either has access to government assured pensions, OPS, NPS, what have you, or you have the private sector where the EPFO, the Employment Provident Fund scheme, is available. But it is available only to those enterprises which employ at least 20 workers. That means all agriculture is out and all small units effectively in the unorganized sector are out. How do you think Vietnam ensured for all its non-farm workers social security for a rising share? Because they kept eliminating these thresholds, 20 workers, etc. Moving on. That is one principle, universality. No one is left out. We are not, for some strange reason, going to have the privilege of pensions while the 90% of our workforce will not. Do they work any less? No, they don't. Incremental coverage, if 91% is without social insurance, the only way that you're going to do it is slowly, upwards. I will lay out a roadmap for that. Thirdly, you have to treat the poor informal workers differently from the non-poor. I'll spell that out. So broadly, the objective is non-contributory for the poor, but partially contributory for the non-poor. I'll spell that out. Fourthly, if the vast majority of informal workers in the non-farm sector are in enterprises which are unorganized and therefore unregistered, then we have to make sure that all enterprises are registered. If the enterprises are not registered, there's not a hope in hell that you will ensure social security for them. So registration of establishments and also workers. And in a paper in Indian Journal of Labor Economics in late 2023, with a former PhD student of mine, which you can have a look at, I argue that 67% of the 64 million non-farm enterprises that exist in our country are unregistered. What does unregistered mean? It means that the government knows nothing about them. Nothing. That they exist also they don't know. However, how do we know that they exist? Because there is a 5-yearly survey of enterprises in the unorganized sector until 2015, and that has become an annual survey called the ASUS Annual Survey of Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector since 21-22, subject we can come back to. So 61.7% of them are unregistered. Next, we have to end the fragmentation of the very limited social insurance that's currently available. What kind of limited social insurance exists? Professor Reddy mentioned earlier the Atal Bima Yojana. There is, of course, which started in 2015. There were some similar schemes under the previous governments, but its coverage is barely. Atal's coverage is 4 million workers. What's the total number of informal workers in the country? 560 million. The total workforce is 610 million. The informal workforce is 550 million, of which 4 million are registered under the Atal. Similarly, 4 or 5 years later, in 2018, just before the 2019 general elections for the Lok Sabha, the government came up with the PM Shramjeevi Man Dhan. What's the coverage of that? Another 3 to 4 million. That's it. And of course, you've heard about the welfare funds. The paper discusses welfare funds. There are plenty, there are 22 of them in Kerala, there are several of them in Tamil Nadu, in Maharashtra, and in a few other states, but most states don't even have welfare funds. I'd advise you to read the paper. I won't have time to talk about welfare funds, unfortunately. A fifth or a sixth principle is that social insurance has to be mandatory, as in the rich countries. All these schemes, Atal, PM Shramjeevi, all of this is not mandatory. It's voluntary, which is a voluntary scheme. If you're a worker, it should be absolutely mandatory by law. That's the only way you're going to universalize it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Now, health. I'm not including health here. Health insurance, i.e. RSBY, what is this new one called? The successor is this Ayushman Bharat. Much touted. Ayushman Bharat is simply an upgrade of the RSBY, which was started in 2008. It's covering you for hospitalization for the poor up to a maximum of 5 lakhs for designated diseases. What about consultation? What about diagnostics? What about drugs? 60% of out-of-pocket expenditure for the citizens of India is accounted for by these 3 categories of expenditure, not hospitalization. Hospitalization is a smaller share of total out-of-pocket expenditure. Please try and appreciate this. मतलब आप बहुत बीमार पड़ जाओगे तो आप हॉस्पिटल में पहुंचोगे, मगर आप तो आए दिन बीमार पड़ते रहते हैं, मगर आप तो डॉक्टर के पास जाते हैं और डॉक्टर वह आपसे जेब में हाथ डाल करके पैसा लेता है कि नहीं? सच बात कह रहा हूं. So health services are a citizen's right. There is just no getting away from that. That's why I'm not talking about, social insurance being connected to your worker status. The nation committed itself in its health policy to universalize health coverage for all, basic curative and preventative care for all, raising our public expenditure from 1% of GDP, center and states taken together, to 2.5% by 2025. Well, we are in 2025. You know what the health expenditure to GDP in the country today is? Can one of the students tell me what it is? 1.3% of GDP. From 1.1% of GDP, we've come to 1.3% of GDP. In other words, we are not even halfway to 2.5, which was an announced deal. Please remember that China, which has much higher coverage, they spend 2.5% of GDP on health to ensure everyone is covered. Everyone in China has coverage. So that's why I'm not talking about social insurance here. Because to my mind, and to in your mind, I believe, health, basic health, preventative care, basic curative is a human right, is a right of our citizens. Moving on, let's just ask the question, does the Social Security Code apply any of these principles? As I said, 2020, a Social Security Code was announced. It's not become law. Why it has not been notified yet, we can talk about it later. Don't have the time to talk about it, but there are issues with the Social Security Code of 2020. It's one of the 4 codes that were passed between 2019 and 2020 by Parliament, which merge effectively, it's a scissor and paste job, which merge 35 existing labor laws of the National Parliament. In addition, please remember there are about 100 state government laws which we don't have time to go into. And let's see what are the foundational problems with the Social Security of 2020. And I say this on the strength of comments that I gave in detailed 13 pages of comments when the Standing Committee on Labor in 2020 sought my comments on that Social Security Code. It was discussing the draft that had been sent to them by the Ministry of Labor, and they incorporated most of my comments in the final comments that was sent by the Standing Committee of Parliament. Do you think the government listened? Of course not. Not a single one of the Standing Committee on Parliament's suggestions were actually incorporated. So what do you currently have? What you have is this. 35 laws compressed into 4, very good. 8 laws related to social security brought into one, but it's pretty much a scissor and paste job. In other words, 91% of the workforce is informal in 2019 before the code. Has that changed or is it likely to change? Unlikely. 91% of our workforce is informal, but 90% of the chapters deal with the formal organized sector in the SS code. Irony of ironies. You just read through that 100-page or 100-clause document. 2 clauses. The grand number of 2 are devoted to the unorganized sector. So that shows how much seriousness there is in this SS code 2020 for the 91% of our workforce. The social security cannot be the preserve of workers with enterprises where there are only 10 or 20 workers. That's what is the threshold. 10 workers is the threshold for ESIC, 20 workers is the threshold for EPFO. You and I know employers can understate the number of workers and get away without ESIC and EPFO registration. Don't we know those employers ourselves? Of course, we know them ourselves. There is no provision in the SS code for progressive, incremental over time provision for reducing or removing these thresholds. The international experience, including that of Vietnam and Asia, other Asian countries, shows that those which have actually attempted to universalize social security for workers in the organized sector have systematically had over time reduced these thresholds. We have no such plans. Moving on. Enterprise registration, as I was saying earlier, enterprise registration of India's 64 million non-farm enterprises is absolutely critical. 67% of our non-farm enterprises are unregistered. That's a typo. 67 are unregistered, and that too, those 30%, 33% which are registered under acts and authorities unconnected to social security. So how do you expect to implement this social security code of 2020? I'd like to know. Never have asked this question in the ministry. Never answered. Maternity benefit. The SS code only mentions 26 weeks for formal firms women. So the vast majority of women in our country don't need or deserve maternity benefits. That's the assumption. That's the assumption of the SS code. It's audacious in the extreme. They tell you to your face, doesn't matter. 91%. Moving on. Can India afford not to universalize social security? I think I've already hinted that the answer is that it cannot afford to. I've already hinted it because you have 15 more years for a demographic dividend to end. And what the implications of what the demographic dividend ending is essentially twofold, and I'll mention them just very briefly. You have then an increasing and large share of the population which is aged and aging and has no coverage. So in other words, the assumption of our policymakers is the following, that they will all work and work and work until they drop dead because they have no pension. The other implication is that as societies age, the health cost as a proportion of GDP increases because longevity is increasing, life expectancy is increasing, but people fall ill. We all know this. We are all aging. Those of us who age are over 60, as I am, and as many of those of you in this room are, you know that you are more susceptible to disease. You have more need for health. But what is the health expenditure to GDP? I've already told you what the status is. There's no likelihood of that national health policy being actually implemented. So on the one hand, you have rising costs of health, the rising expectation of elderly people for good quality health services, and at the same time, no pension. The worst of all possible worlds. India is young now, but aging fast. The demographic dividend is finishing between 36 and 40. I've already said that. And let's not live in this belief that, it's just Kerala and South India which is aging. UP, Bihar, MP, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, West Bengal, they are also aging. There are only 3 states of India after 2020 which have a total fertility rate of over 2. All other northern states of India also have a fertility rate which has been systematically declining. So everyone has to be provided for. Moving on. What does this imply? It means that the falling working age population will have to support social security for the elderly. If we don't start now, we should have started yesterday. If we don't start now, it's already too late. That's why what you're going to hear from me is a 10-year plan in which we can universalize social security. And it is doable, it is feasible, fiscally as well, as I will demonstrate. Falling working population will also have to support health services for rising share of the elderly, a point I want to make. So let's now finally return to the architecture of social security, which in a sense that my research is proposing. And I have to tell you that I've been advising governments around the world for about 20 years of my last 20 years of my professional life. I still do that. And this is based on the international literature, which you will not find references to as I speak for shortage of time. First point that we all need to remember is the following. That we all know that if 91% of our workforce is informal, there has to be a high differentiation among the informal workers in India. There are poor informal workers, and there are likely to be non-poor informal workers as well. So, obviously, that means that there are classes within the non-poor, because we all know that there is an unequal distribution of income across the population of the non-poor, because there are formal workers there as well as informal workers. So, the first thing is a high differentiation. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. So what I'm proposing is that we use 3 classes of beneficiaries. One are the non-contributory for the poorest, meaning non-contributory pension plans or social insurance plan for those who are the poorest. The poorest I began by talking about is the Rangarajan Committee group of 22%. Okay? In their case, the proposal is that the entire premium will have to be paid by governments because state governments and center taken together, shared equally. If that's the case, Telangana can start it now, tomorrow. It's not going to be expensive. We can talk about it. Second, in the case of the non-poor, and that's what I'm now telling you, there's partial contribution by the non-poor regular workers. You see, the workers in our country are categorized into 3 categories. There are the self-employed, and then there are the casual wage workers, and then there are the regular wage workers. The regular wage workers are all of us. In this room, all of us are regular salaried workers. We constitute about 20% of our workforce of 610 million. Then, of course, there is the Dihadi Mazdoor, the casual wage workers. But 58% of the workforce is self-employed. The self-employed itself has 3 subdivisions, 3 subcategories. There are employers who constitute only 1 or 2% of the 58%. Many of those 1 or 2% are likely to have their own private LIC policies or Bajaj Alliance policies, etc., right? But the fact of the matter is the vast majority of the self-employed consist of own account workers, the mochi on the street, the nai, the presswala, etc., right? Who make our living easy, right? Our ease of living comes from them. And Finally, you have the category of unpaid family labor. That means the son, the wife, the daughter who works on the family farm or who works in the shop, but unpaid family labor. They are all self-employed, 58% of the work. So what are we saying? Partial contribution by the regular wage workers and by non-poor self-employed, complemented by government subsidies. This is very important, complemented by government subsidies, which are found in many Asian countries, while employers, the subcategory of the 2% that I mentioned in the self-employed, and the employers of the regular workers, or for that matter, the employers of the casual wage workers, all making full contribution. I hope that's clear. Formal workers, that's the third category. Obviously, full employer-employee contribution. This is pretty much as prevails under the EPFO. So that's your third category. So you've got three categories of beneficiaries with three different schemas of payment into a fund. Because that's what social insurance. Social insurance essentially means you're creating a fund for which there are inflows coming in from various sources. The workers, the employers, the government, what have you. So this category, of course, already exists. We know it. It's these categories, the first two, which we have to be creating. Moving on. To eliminate fragmentation, please appreciate this very important point. To eliminate fragmentation, the first two, that is speaking about the non-contributory, the poorest, and the partial contribution by the non-poor. The first two are all informal workers, should be part of the same system, since they are the unorganized sector informal workers. Okay, just give me a second. I'll move to this, and now you change it while I. So the third category, of course, are formal workers in the organized sector. So there should be now. How many funds should there be? Where am I taking this idea, this question from? This question is coming from because this question was discussed because I was part of that whole discussion process in the run-up to the preparation of the draft of the SS Code of 2020. Up to three drafts, I was actually being invited by the Ministry of Labor for the discussion along with the employers as well as the workers. Now, interestingly, you will recall a 2008 Act. You will recall a 2008 Social Security for unorganized sector workers. Now, the point here is there was a lot of back and forth at that time in the preparation of the Social Security Code. Should there be just one fund in the country for unorganized as well as organized workers, or should there be two separate funds? The trade unions, which are mostly led by the organized sector workers, it doesn't matter whether it's C2 or it's ITAC or INTAC or BMS, all pretty much dominated by the organized sector. They said, no, you can't merge the two. No way. Otherwise, you will start using our money to sort of pay for the unorganized. You get the principle? Very important. So there should be two funds only, but only two funds. Not a building and workers construction fund, not a welfare fund for 22 types of workers in Kerala, not a BD workers fund, yada, yada, yada. End that fragmentation. You understand? Just two funds. That's what a universal system. And the other, of course, the National Social Security Board for Unorganized Sector Workers, which is mentioned by the court, and no separate fund for gig and platform workers. No such thing. There's talk in the Social Security Code about gig and platform workers. Why? We all know who gig and platform workers is. This newfangled term, gig and platform. What are they? They're just one subcategory of self-employed workers. So why are you creating a separate fund, separate schema? Every state is now. Rajasthan, another, I think your own government maybe is thinking about this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Why? What is this? Why the gig and platform workers are being singled out for special treatment? Don't understand the logic. Because they are essentially self-employed workers and informal workers like everybody else. It's minor variation. So in other words, we have to sort out these nitty-gritty issues. Moving on in the interest of time, rationale for subsidization of poor and non-poor informal workers. What's the rationale? Because the poor informal workers cannot afford to pay. How do you expect that dihadi mazdoor, the 20% of the total workforce, which is casual wage worker, who today has some work, tomorrow has no work? Or that, why just them? What about the own account workers? The mochi on the roadside, the nai sitting there on a literally a brick or a one kursi and cutting hair, or that phalwala that you buy your sabzi or phal from. What about them? They are own account workers. They are a pretty large number. Now, they have very variable incomes like this. Rainy day, your income's gone, finished. Right? You fall ill, your thela can't be operated. Who's going to operate your thela? Okay. So these are poor people. The full premium has to be covered by the government because they cannot afford to pay, hence they're not willing to pay. And those would include landless labor in the rural areas, casual wage workers in urban areas, marginal farmers, possibly even small farmers. That would constitute a much larger number than the 22% I'm taking care of. But that's why I'll come to the sort of more higher than 22% people. Non-poor informal, well, we have to think about a graded subsidy depending upon income level of the informal. And there I'm thinking of first, the young, low-wage earning workers with variable incomes usually avoid entering such a scheme. A subsidy from the government would facilitate them to join at an early age, thus building up a corpus. That's the foundational principle of social insurance. You build up a corpus because that's what's going to enable that payment to be made out for the rest of your life when you decide to retire. And their joining, such young people joining, prevents fragmentation of the social security system by ensuring a high share of the population is covered because it allows large-scale risk pooling. The young are included as well as the elderly, because if you only have elderly, you'll have large payouts and no pay-ins. You have to ensure a balance of both are included. So risk pooling, sustainable financing based on the solidarity principle. That's a foundational principle of social security in any society. Administrative arrangements, I'm going to sort of skip through rather quickly. Approach should be simultaneous action, top down and bottom up to complete the coverage of poor informal workers in the first 5 years. Very important. You start today, in 5 years, you can cover the 22% poor informal because that action is all entirely in the hands of government. Action even for the informal non-poor will also be in the hands of government. But there are many other players going to be involved there. But this 120 million odd, the 22% that I'm talking about, could be covered in 5 years. Of the total 550 million informal workers, whose numbers will continue to rise, please appreciate. You know, that 93% is remaining 93%. It's not coming down. The size of the formal workforce is not growing. Right? That's what I began with. Jobs are not growing, especially in the organized sector. So the game plan here that I'm proposing is that everyone does get covered. The 91% gets covered, while the poorest gets covered in the years 1 to 5, the years 6 to 10 will cover the remainder. Because that will already take us to 2035, and we have to enable the system to stabilize while the population is still young. After 2040, 5 years later, too late. We're an aging society. The numbers of aging will rise very sharply. Okay, so, I'm going to be, in the interest of time, move very rapidly through the rest of the bullets. But the problem is the main administrative arrangements that I'm talking about are missing from the rules, not just the law, the rules, which I've had a chance to look at, of the Social Security Code. We have to ensure that Social Security to workers in the unregistered enterprises is provided for. There's precious little mention of that category, the unregistered enterprises. So hence, the registration of enterprises is the sine qua non. It's the first and most important thing that I was talking about. Moving on quickly. There are plenty of mechanisms to encourage formalization. They could be inserted in the rules of the SS code. The Telangana government rules must be ready. I think CESS could actually ask for those rules, copy of the rules, and analyze them, see whether some of these principles that I'm talking about are actually incorporated there or not. What is deterrence? Stronger inspection services. We don't have enough labor inspectors. I can talk about that later. We need the existence of credible sanctions and penalties and detection and prevention of social evasion through the exchange of data between tax authorities plus social security institutions. For instance, we've had GST registrations growing, right? You also have Udyam registration for the small medium enterprise. Do you think the GST registration automatically means that those companies are actually being captured in the EPFO database? No, there's no such thing happening. You have to examine this in detail. It has to be done at the state level. Drill down to the data. We need to have incentives also in place, not just deterrence. This is deterrence, incentive, linking payment by firms to Social Security Fund and workers' contribution to access to SMEs to business support services. The government can promise, we will give you business support services, but you bloody well first register in our Social Security system. Huh? But we'll provide you access to markets, and we can subject the proof of Social Security Fund registration to government approvals. Government seeks approvals for a whole series of things. Bijli ka, pani ka, ye, wo, 20 approvals aapko chahiye. Make sure you're going to register, and then we will, in the Social Security Fund, and then we will approve. Persuasion, increasing legal awareness of employers plus workers, culture of compliance, making evident the benefits of formalization. In other words, unless you tell the employers, you will actually receive benefits. We will help you by providing you support service. But how are you going to help them if you don't know that they exist? Because you've not registered them. You've not counted them. They figure in wherever you've counted them, they exist in God knows how many Shops and Establishments Act, this municipal act, that act, this authority, that authority. The back-end data has to be merged. We call ourselves a country which is at the forefront of creating a digital infrastructure. What about this digital infrastructure for the vast majority of our workers? Okay, moving on very rapidly. So we've got to register the workers, piggybacking on existing databases that exist or being created. You have the Manrega database, you have the PDS, One Nation, One Ration Card database, you have the eShram portal database. Merge them, and then deduplicate. You need the Aadhaar card. Come on, let's use the Aadhaar card for real work for the large majority of the population. The cost. अरे कैसे करेंगे? पैसा बहुत लगेगा. कर ही नहीं सकते. सरकार के पास पैसे नहीं. अच्छा तो देखिए. Here we've actually estimated, and here I owe my debt of gratitude to Professor Parida sitting right here in the front row. Professor at the University of Hyderabad. He's done these estimates at my request. We've calculated the number of poor. We've only estimated the cost for the first 5 years for the government, because these are costs for the government only. Please appreciate that. So we have to first convince the governments. But who in the government? Government, of course, includes the Department of Labor, but most importantly includes the Secretary of Finance and the Chief Minister. You don't convince the Secretary of Finance, he'll say, "Bhag jao. Huh? We can't do this. Not possible." Then you have to turn around and ask the Secretary of Finance, "Acha sahab, you've not done it for 75 years, but now you become the 5th largest economy in the world. You're the fastest growing large economy in the world. You're about to become the 3rd largest economy in the world. You want to become a superpower, you become a Vikasit Bharat. But the high-income countries all have Social Security. And they had Social Security about 75 years ago. So how are you planning to become Vikasit Bharat without providing Social Security, without providing health coverage for everyone, without ensuring that your education expenditure rises to 6% of GDP. No one talking about the roadmap. We're just talking about X growth rate. X growth rate has to be translated into a certain roadmap for getting you from $2,800 per capita, $2,800 per capita now to $14,000. That's a high income country. That's the bottom threshold of the high income country. How are you going to get there? Do you see a roadmap? Is there a planning commission there? No, the Niti Aayog has not produced a roadmap. You just told, we are here today, tomorrow we will be there. You have to ask the question, Are bhai kaise? Kab? Kyun? How? How are you getting there? Have you asked that question? So we've done the numbers. I won't bore you with these numbers. I want you to just look at the next graphic, which is practically the last slide. And we've done the numbers. What is the total cost in rupees billion, or which is, I'll tell you what it is. It's 1.37 lakh crores. This is 1.37 lakh crores in the first year. In 2019-20, as a proportion of GDP, the cost, that amounts to 0.69% of GDP. 0.69% of GDP, or 1.37 lakh is, or trillion rupees, 1.37, is just a little over what you spend on Manrega each year under COVID. Okay? So don't think, oh, how can we do it? We are bankrupt. We don't have the money. You have the money. I'm showing it to you that you have the money. And if you start looking at labor welfare expenditures, you'll actually discover that the government, state and center taken together, already spends about 1.45 lakh crores each year on labor welfare. But you do this on this, that, and the other, but you don't provide the basic social security that you need, which you want to say you want to provide in a Vikasita Bharat. So it's only 6.69% of GDP in that year. And over time, it's actually dropping. Why is it dropping as a proportion of GDP? Because your GDP is increasing. You can't say on one hand कि GDP तो बढ़ता रहेगा, will become the third largest, but वो जो है amount बढ़ेगा. Of course, the amount will increase, but these are the year 1, year 2, meaning this is year 1 means T plus 1. Okay, this is T plus 2, 3, and 4. So absolute amount increases, slightly increasing. Obviously, the absolute numbers is increasing. We are becoming an aging society. But the share of GDP is dropping. In a matter of 5 years, it's dropping. You get the point I'm making. So let me close, and now I'm actually on my very last slide where I summarize. What have I said? Reducing informality is urgent due to the impending end to the demographic dividend. Let's remember this fact. The demographic dividend ending, aging society happening in the far distant future, we don't have to think about 2050, 2060. No, sir. 15 years down the road. Cannot wait for a, like the ILO says, oh, we have to get to an employer-employee relationship to be established. How? When? Employer-employee relationship means the EPFO system gets universalized. 75 years, you've gotten to only 9% of your workforce. Yeah? The Sarkari Babus have been claiming, OPS काट दिया, NPS क्यों कट दिया, तो बेकार है NPS, OPS लाओ वापस. Bankrupting the government, OPS. Yeah? You might keep making noises about OPS. 90% of the workforce is without any pension in any case. You don't care, and that's not even part of the discourse. So the share of self-employed has gone from 52% to 58%. The share of workers in agriculture, who are all informal, has gone from 42% in 2017-18 to 46%. The number of workers in agriculture has increased by 80 million in just 4 years. All without social security. And they're not even coming out of there because non-farm jobs are not growing, which is what I was saying earlier. The SS Code 2020 does not address any of the requirements of the principles of social security provision. I've given out to you an architecture and administrative arrangements in the existing structure which need to be universalized. And I've given you the roadmap with a staggered implementation for the poor and the non-poor. And the cost for 5 years is perfectly feasible fiscally. So thank you very much indeed for your patience. Thank you very much.
I'd like to congratulate Professor Mehrotra for an excellent lecture, which we can see from the beautiful questions we have got for him, and also the good questions raised by you, sir, and by several participants. I'll just make a few observations. The first point which he mentioned about the higher education system. Since I have come from a higher education system, this question keeps bothering us. Why there is so much high level of unemployment among the educated? But certain places, for example, the ICFAI University, where I come from in Hyderabad, the 9,000 students we have got 100% placements. Everybody gets a job. Now the question is, how you are managing? We manage right from day one. That amount of skill orientation to them, the soft skills and other technical skills, digital skills, and the team which manages, and the correspondence they have with several companies of different from all over India. That just doesn't go that you just complete the degree and then he is in the job market. The university, the college can also help them see that we get all our place, and that is why the enrollments are so high, so much demand for admissions. You see, we get thousands of applications, even though it's a private university. Sir, but that's a very important point you have mentioned. We have to think about how at a national level you can achieve 100%, not only in the higher education, but also you have mentioned about the vocational education. That bothered me even more, why the unemployment rate is high. The second point I would like to mention is about the Viksit Bharat. Sir, you have rightly mentioned, I was thinking about it. Viksit Bharat, what does the Prime Minister say? It has to increase the per capita income, which is now $2,500 in India now, should go to $14,000 as Professor Mehrotra has mentioned in his lecture. When? By 2047. But the question is, $14,000 is the present definition of a developed country. You see, but will it be 14,000 in 2047 is a question which we have to ask. By that time, it may go up. So then what happens? I think that's it. But even more important than that, okay, somehow the growth rates have to be further increased. If the per capita income is $18,000, then you have to go much higher rate. Okay, that keep aside. More important, which Professor Mehrotra has mentioned is, will it be the only income criteria? What about social security? Have you introduced it? That's also very important. Not just a single number, you become Viksit Bharat. No. What percentage are getting social security? Have you ensured unemployment insurance, health insurance, etc. are very important. Then another very important point he has mentioned is the shrinking time window. So the emerging conclusion is you should act now onwards and don't wait till. The other point is fiscal challenges. What are the fiscal challenges? Because the government demand is coming from health, from education, from infrastructure, from defense, environment, etc. It is true there is demand, you see. Because even health expenditure is only still less than 2%. Education, so much we talk about, we are well below, but this also should get due priority, achievement of social security. How do we formalize the informal sector so that, that is also, there was one question which one of the students, PhD students asked, that's a very important point which must be addressed to. Then the question of administrative arrangements, because large population, so many people requiring this. So we should have a robust governance mechanism to ensure this. The point of sustainability. How can we make it sustainable? Whether is it a contribution by government, by the employer, and by the individual, whether such a combination can may be able to make it sustainable. The point of Ayushman Bharat, the issue of Ayushman Bharat, to be further expanded is a very important observation sir has made. Suppose we go to a doctor. Now, what do we do? Before I go to my cardiologist, I must take my ECG. Without ECG, I won't even get an appointment. You see, I must give all the blood tests. You see, then consultancy fee, of course, is there. Then after consultancy fee, so much of expenditure goes for buying the medicines rather than hospitalization. The other aspects also, if they are incorporated, Ayushman Bharat may benefit a larger numbers, and this so outpatient care should get due priority. Now, we had an excellent presentation on the cost of this. And he has come out with a beautiful figure of 0.69% to be shared by the central and state governments. You see, that means half of 0.35% by the central. Now, this, you see, this point, which is coming out to 1.37 lakh crores. This is the cost, which sir also has pointed out that it is feasible, it can be done, and it should be given very high priority to for implementation. The SS code, sir, which we didn't know much about it, but thank you very much for explaining the various aspects and the challenges involved in the SS code, which more importantly, sir, the type of work you have done is very relevant to CESS and other universities. Direct policy-oriented research. We want more and more. We want theoretical research also. More and more, we focus on applied research, beneficial to the government, beneficial to the industry, so that the interaction between the universities, industry, and government must increase. Without much ado, then I would like to finally conclude that we are extremely grateful to you. You have enlightened, you were clear, we have extreme clarity in the presentation, thought, and this. Thank you. I now request Madam Dr. Alivelu Kasturi to present a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Respected Chair, Professor Mahender Reddy, Professor Santosh Mehrotra, Professor Revathi, on the occasion of the 7th Foundation Lecture of our institute, I feel privileged to propose this vote of thanks. Special thanks are due to Professor Santosh Mehrotra for accepting our invitation to deliver this Foundation Day Lecture and providing deep insights into the employment connected to structural crisis of the economy. The 7 principles that ensure social security with more focus on Code 2020, social insurance, and the architecture of social security system. Sir, I once again thank you for your in-depth lecture to us. Deep gratitude to Professor J. Mahender Reddy garu for chairing this session and also for setting the tone for today's lecture and providing us with valuable concluding remarks focusing on higher education, Viksit Bharat, and formalization of informal sector. Heartfelt thanks to our director, Professor Revathi, for organizing this informative and knowledgeable lecture and putting in all the efforts to make this lecture a grand success. Ma'am, we thank you for taking us on a ride through the journey of our institution for the last 3 decades. I would like to thank the print and the social media, and special thanks are due to the back-end support. I think without them, this lecture would not have been possible. Our director Peshi, and then the technical expertise that has been provided today, the FO and his staff, the administrative officer and his staff. I thank all my colleagues who are present here. Special thanks to the members of the Board of Governors family of our first director, Dr. Wahiduddin Khan, then the research scholars, and all my faculty. Thanks to one and all.